Let me remind you that the leader of the pack has to stand alone. And so I want to talk to you tonight about when a leader has to stand alone, because there is loneliness in leadership. I am a Civil War buff, not so much about the battles. I mean, they explain, a sweeping move on the right flank, and I have no idea what that means. I know what charge straight ahead and get killed means. I know what that looks like, but I don't understand all the logistics of battle and everything else. And so really, I am more interested in the people of the Civil War and why they were leaders. Some of the greatest leaders and generals on both sides. Really, the South had better generals than the North. The North had more men, but they all came out of West Point or Virginia Military Institute, VMI. And I have a picture that hangs in my office of Robert E. Lee sitting outside his tent. And the reason I have that picture is because of the title of it. He's sitting in the tent, outside the tent. There's a light on inside the tent. And the picture is simply entitled, "The Loneliness of Command." There is a loneliness in leadership. We all think that, people make leadership decisions, but I know when George H.W. Bush made the decision that we were going to go into Iraq because Iraq had invaded Kuwait, he had to make that decision. A lot of people gave him advice. But any president that makes a decision to send men to war has to make that decision by himself because he is accountable for it. Everybody can have an opinion, but he has to make the decision. So if you remember, that pack is coming in on that wolf's territory, and he has positioned the small wolf down on the ledge down below him, and he's standing to show his position. As I read the Bible, I see a lot of loneliness in people that God used. Can you imagine how lonely it was for Noah to preach and to build that ark year after year, decade after decade, and nobody responded but his family? I mean, you talk about being disappointed at an invitation. I mean, he's every day. He's preaching and nobody's responding. He's telling them judgment's coming and nobody's responding. Can you imagine the loneliness of Moses? I mean, he leaves and the whole place goes crazy. His brother Aaron, collects all the gold, throws it in, there's a gold calf. I mean, it's crazy. It's just insane. The things that Moses had to do. And yet Moses was a man who spoke to God face to face as a man speaks to a friend. You imagine David? Now, David had his faithful men, but you think about David running from Saul. Now, here's a guy who knows he's going to be the next king, and the quickest way to be the next king is to kill the king. But God doesn't let him do it. God makes him trust him. And we would not have the Psalms today if David hadn't learned in loneliness to listen to God. And in times when there was nobody else there, and we see David's tears and we see David's heart. And the reason we love the Psalms when we're in trouble and when we're suffering is because we know somebody has been there. Somebody has gone through what we've gone through. I mean, when you read David, you see, he says, "I'm like a man in a furnace. My heart is cut like grass. I don't feel like eating." He felt like he was wasting away. Here's the thing. Being a leader has physical, emotional, and spiritual consequences. I mean, being a leader takes a toll on you. I mean, we know that. I mean, look at anybody that's been president for 8 years. They age 20 while they're in office. Hey, I know. I'm only 27 years old. Look at me. Look what leadership has done to me. I mean, I came here with dark hair, and now I'm just a mess. I'm like Ron Dunn. If it wasn't for medication, I'd be on drugs. I mean, it's just, it has physical consequences. It has emotional consequences. It has spiritual consequences. Now let's talk about loneliness and the painful part. Here's what's painful about it. When you see something before others see it. The leader has to see before others. When you see something before others see it and they don't get it, or they don't grasp it, or they resist it, whatever it might be. Secondly, when you sense something before others sense it, you just know there's a change coming. You know there's a decision that has to be made. You know something's wrong. Something doesn't smell right. Something doesn't feel right. When you sense something before others sense it. When you do something before others are willing to do it. When you do something before others are willing to do it. We were kind of on the forefront of making Christian movies, and now everybody does it. Can I tell you, we weren't the cool kid on the block when we started. People thought we were crazy. And when you do something before others are willing to do it, it's easy to do it once somebody else has done it. I mean, it took a long time for somebody to run a 4-minute mile. But once somebody did it, then everybody knew it could be done. It just takes a while. It took Lindbergh getting in an airplane to fly across the ocean nonstop and land in Paris. Somebody had to do it. Probably a lot of people sat around and said, oh yeah, I think that could be done, right circumstances. But he had to get in an airplane by himself and do it. When you do something before other people are willing to do it, when you count on someone and they don't come through, that may be the toughest part of leadership. I want to ask you to take your Bibles before we ever get to Nehemiah and turn to 2 Timothy chapter 4. 2 Timothy chapter 4. And I want to talk about the Apostle Paul. I have probably found myself more familiar with this personal part of Paul's letter to Timothy than maybe anything else he said to Timothy. I'm sorry, it's 2 Timothy chapter 4. 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 9. Make every effort to come to see me soon. For Demas, having loved this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Pick up Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful to me for service. But Tychicus I have sent to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak which I left at Troas with Carpus, and the books, especially the parchments. Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. The Lord will repay him according to his deeds. Be on guard against him yourself, for he vigorously opposed our teaching. At my first offense, no one supported me, but all deserted me. May it not be counted against them. But the Lord stood with me and strengthened me, so that through me the proclamation might be fully accomplished, that all the Gentiles might hear, and I was rescued out of the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. So let's look at some lessons from this. First of all, there will be people who will turn their backs on you. If you live long enough, there will be people who will turn their backs on you. Family members, friends, co-workers, people you counted on. Now let me read verse 10 again from the Message. Demas, chasing fads, went off to Thessalonica and left me here. The King James says Demas has forsaken me. Paul says, having loved this present world, he has deserted me. Now here's a guy. Now just think about what it means to be on Paul's staff. How'd you like to go through that personnel interview? Here's what it's going to take to work with me. Here's what it's going to take to go on missionary journeys. Here's a guy who started well, Philemon 24, and so do Mark, Aristarchus, Demas, and Luke, my fellow workers. He calls him a fellow worker. In Colossians 4:14, our dear friend Luke, the doctor, and Demas. Now he's not our dear friend Luke, the doctor, and Demas. Now, he was a fellow worker. Now he's just Demas. And then you get to 2 Timothy 4:10. Demas has forsaken me. So here's a friend, a fellow worker, and now a deserter. Here's a guy who has turned his back on Paul. I'm not sure what happened. We don't know. Maybe Demas got tired of the battle. Maybe he got drained. Maybe it was more than he thought it would be. Maybe his heart got cold. Maybe he was disillusioned with the ministry. Maybe he thought Paul was perfect, and he started working for him and found out he wasn't. By the way, there are no perfect leaders. And I don't care who you work for, who you work with, or if you become the leader, you're not a perfect leader. And there are no perfect leaders to work for. Every leader has flaws. Every leader has flaws. Don't say that so loud, Ken. No. Now, Demas, this is important. God does not waste words. Demas did not forsake the Lord. He forsook Paul. Demas has forsaken me and gone to Thessalonica. Hey, there was a good church in Thessalonica. Here's where I want you to kind of hang with me for a minute, okay? If you have reached the level of leadership to work with the Apostle Paul, anything else is backsliding. Unless he has sent you, which we're going to find in the next group of names he mentions. I mean, Demas just got in a backslidden condition. He just didn't want to pay the price. He didn't want to work that hard. There are all kinds of people in ministry that want the joys of ministry. They just don't want to work hard. I mean, they want to show up at 8 or 9 o'clock, drink a cup of coffee, and leave at 5 and go home and make it a 9-to-5 job. Well, there are jobs that you can do that. It's called Target, Walmart. There are a lot of places you can do that. But ministry's not that way. I mean, the average week is at least 60 hours, sometimes 80. And so Demas gets on board, and the stakes go up. And because Paul is close to the end of his life. And can I tell you, when the stakes go up, people go out. They will leave. You see it in the life of Jesus. All these people are following Jesus. Well, why wouldn't they follow him? I mean, he's feeding them. He's doing miracles. He's healing their relatives. And then all of a sudden he turns around and says, this is what it costs to follow me. Luke chapter 14. And it says many, it said they were disciples, but it says, and many followed him no more. By the time Jesus got to the cross, all he had was his mom and a couple other women and John. I mean, you talk about feeding thousands and having thousands following you and singing Hosanna. And when he gets to the end, when he needs people the most, they've all bailed out. They've run for the tall grass. And so if you're going to be a leader, there are going to be people who turn their backs on you. And let me tell you how that works. You'll have a friend that will be in a church here or somewhere else. And they would say, you know, I'm feeling led to go to another church. I just don't want to do that much. I don't want to serve. I don't want to give. I don't want to invest. I don't want to do that. I don't want to come on Sunday nights. I want to be able to do this, and I want to be able to do that. They're not forsaking the Lord, but what they're doing is they're lowering the standard of their life to what they're comfortable with. I cannot find one verse in the Bible that says, be comfortable. And the day I get comfortable, I start going on life support because I quit exercising my faith like I'm supposed to. And people will bail out, say, well, you know, it's just not convenient. It's just not convenient. I don't want to do that. And they'll bail out. And if you're a leader, you have to accept that that is a reality of being a leader. People will bail out on you. How many people have bailed out in government? You know, they work for somebody, they give them a job, they get a platform, and they get a $1 million book deal, and then they write a tell-all book about the person that gave them their opportunity. Happens all the time. I mean, let's not be shocked by this. Let me just tell you, there are things that you can't control as a leader that will break your heart. I'll just give you a list. People you see with unlimited potential who settle for less. You see all this potential in them, and they settle for less. Those you pour into who end up throwing darts at you. Those who have been with you in a crisis but can't move beyond the crisis and go back to a normal relationship. They feed off of a crisis mentality. Those who have been you've been close to and you find out they've been stabbing you in the back. Those who leave you and shoot over their shoulders. Those who leave and try to take other people with them so they feel better about their decision. Always happens. Always happens. Don't be shocked by it. But I'll tell you, it's hard not to be hurt by it. Number two, there will be people who have to leave for the right reasons, and suddenly you feel alone. There are people that need to leave for the right reasons. I mean, when we sent Timothy Burney to Germany, he left for the right reason because of our investment in reaching an unreached, unengaged people group. Verse 10, Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. There's nothing negative about this statement. He's made a negative statement about Demas, but there's nothing negative about this statement about these two men. They've just gone. They've been assigned, or it doesn't say, but he's not complaining about them leaving. And then he says, only Luke is with me. Ron Dunn used to say, only Luke. It's come down to just me and Luke. You know, the lousy doctor couldn't get any other patients, so he just stuck with me. No, Luke, listen, if Luke had not stayed with Paul, Paul wouldn't have never made it to the third missionary journey. Luke bandaged him up. He stayed with him. He sat with him in prison. He worked with him. He served him. He stayed by his side. There are people who need to leave for the right reasons. John Mason said, a true friend is one who is there to care. They remain your friend even when you don't deserve to have a friend. They will see you through when others think you're through. Or as my friend Jay Strike says, a friend is the person that walks in the room when everybody else is walking out. Number three, to survive, you need a team who can speak into your life in times when you want to retreat. You need a team who can speak into your life at times when you want to retreat. Now, this is not going to come up on the screen. I'm just going to tell you I'm not going to tell you who. I'm going to tell you the kind of people that are on the team that I have around me, and that's some inside this church, some outside this church. They're my unofficial board of directors. They're my go-to people. They're the people I call. They're the ones that help me make decisions. I didn't make it to Texas for the evangelism conference because of the storm, and I called Tom Elliff and I said, Tom, you know, I got to preach Monday afternoon, I've got to preach Monday night, and I've got to get out of Knoxville, and we got bad weather in Knoxville, we got ice on the roads, and he said, Michael, just don't go. Well, everything within me says I'm going to let people down if I don't go. And then he said, Michael, let me just tell you something. He said, if you don't go, it's going to be okay. He said, there's probably some 23, 24-year-old kid sitting on the front row that's got a word from God and waiting for somebody to ask him, and he'll do a better job than you anyway. Yay, Tom. All right, here are the kind of people you need on your board of directors. And I want to tell you something. The reason most people aren't leaders is because they will not surround themselves with these kind of people. You need somebody who can speak into your life even when it hurts. Not to tear you down, but to help you. Their goal is not to destroy you. Their goal is to help you. They need to speak into your life even when it hurts. And all of us, when somebody does that, our first reaction is to get defensive. You need somebody that will believe the best about you when others are doubting you. You need somebody that believes the best about you. You need somebody that will go to the wall believing the best about you. My youth minister did that for me. And still does, 74, 75 years old, and still believes the best about me. And he knows a lot of junk about me from before I was saved, but he is one of my biggest cheerleaders, and I am eternally grateful for that. You need someone who will stretch you and not allow you to have a pity party. You need someone who will stretch you and not allow you to have a pity party. I've told you this story before when I called Ron Dunn one day and things were not going well here in the early 90s, and I was having a pity party and I was whining and griping. And so I just picked up the phone and called Ron, and I was about 3 minutes into the conversation, and Ron said, "Oh, Michael, just stop. Just stop it right now. You're making me miss the pastorate," and hung up. Ron Dunn, who battled manic depressive, bipolar, and yet walked in the victorious Christian life, Ron Dunn never allowed me to have a pity party. Never. You need somebody like that in your life who tells you to quit pouting, get up, and go do what God called you to do. Number 4, you need somebody that will help you relax and laugh. You need somebody to just help you relax and laugh. I mean, folks, we all take ourselves too seriously. I take myself way too seriously. Listen, God has a sense of humor. Have you ever seen a baboon's behind? I mean, God has a sense of humor. I mean, really, He created it. I mean, if you see some of the things God created, we need to laugh every now and then. We need to lighten up a little bit. You need somebody to help you laugh. I tell you who does that for me is Roger Breland. I can get on the phone with Roger Breland. The first thing that happens to me when I get on the phone with Roger is I start talking like him. Terry and I were talking about this the other day. I saw, I don't think the glory fell today. I'm just not real sure. But Roger and I can laugh, and we can just pick up anywhere, anytime, any place, and just start laughing about something. And sometimes it's just about us. And, Roger's dad would come up to him at the first years of truth, and Roger's dad would come up to him. Roger's dad was as mean as a snake. I mean, he would tell Roger, he said, "You're not as good as tater water." And any of you that ever cook, you put potatoes in water, you boil it and pour the water down the drain because it's not good for anything else. I mean, that's the gift of encouragement that Roger's dad had on it. And Roger's dad had come up to him with the pastor standing right there. And he would go to a concert, and he'd go up to him. The pastor would be standing right by Roger, and he said, "Well, I tell you, Roger, you didn't get any money tonight. This church is cheap." And he'd turn around and just walk off. You just need somebody to help you laugh. I mean, do you have somebody? I'm not talking about somebody who's always telling you a joke. I mean, somebody you can relax and laugh with them. You need somebody who will be with you through thick and thin. You need somebody to be with you through thick and thin, because I want to tell you, you're going to go through both. If you're in leadership, you got to have somebody who's going to stay with you. You need somebody to be closer than a brother. You need somebody to be closer than a brother. And you need somebody who will believe in your vision and pray it through for you. I tell you, Don Miller's been that for me. Today's Don Miller's 93rd birthday. Don Miller has been that for me since 1985. Praying for me. They'll pray it through with you. They'll pray it through for you. They'll pray for you when you don't even want to pray for yourself. Linda Breland's been that for us. Linda Breland's one of the greatest prayer warriors I've ever known. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a text message from her, and she would say something like this: "I have been on my face before God all morning praying for you." Now, can I tell you something? My mom never did that for me. My dad never did that for me. Most of my peers in ministry have never done that for me. But she does. You need people who can speak into your life. And you know, when somebody like that who gets on their face before God and prays for you, they say, you know, God's been speaking to me and here's what I'm praying for you. I better listen, because they've been talking to God and God's been talking to them. Number 4, you need a forgiving spirit when you've been hurt, so you don't permanently write people off. That's a hard one, folks. Whether you're a leader or not, we live in an unforgiving nation. You need a forgiving spirit. Now, I want you to look at verse 11. I love the Bible because the Bible is such a pure, true book. Pick up Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful to me for service. Now, remember Mark on the first missionary journey? He goes and he blows it. I don't know if he got the missing, mama's collard greens and cornbread. I don't know if he missed his bed. He didn't like staying in a Hampton Inn all the time with Paul. I don't know if he thought, they stoned Paul, the next thing they're going to do is stone me. But Mark left. And so they finish the journey and they come back to the second journey. And so, Paul and Barnabas, they go to Cracker Barrel and they sit down and they're talking about what they're going to do on the next journey. And Barnabas says, well, I'll tell you what, I'll go get Mark and we can take off. And Paul says, we're not taking Mark with us. He said, well, yeah, he was with us. I know he got a little homesick, but I'll go get Mark. We'll take him with us. And Paul says, over my dead body. And Paul and Barnabas parted. Now, before we make our Bible characters into sinless perfectionists, Paul and Barnabas had an argument and they parted ways. They disagreed about how to do the mission work of God. And somehow, God blessed both of them. Imagine that. God's bigger than our pettiness. Imagine that. And so they part ways, and so Barnabas takes Mark, and Paul picks up Silas, and they split. Now, here's what's not recorded. Somewhere along the line, situations and conversations took place so that at the end of his life, when Paul is thinking about meeting Jesus and he's in prison, at the end of his life, Paul says, I need that boy that forsook me on that first journey. I need him to come back. For he is useful to me for service. By the way, he's useful to me. The original language is he's useful to do the same thing he couldn't do the first time. Now that's a wow. That's one of those little verses you read over trying to get to some great verse in the Bible, and you kind of miss this one. Now, let me tell you a couple of things here. Paul had to give Mark a second chance. He had to choose to give Mark a second chance. But not only that, Mark had to get over his hurt feelings. Can you imagine when Mark first left? He probably trashed the Apostle Paul a little bit. Well, he just doesn't know what I bring to the table. He just doesn't understand how good I am. And Barnabas, remember his name means encourager. Barnabas speaks to Mark and he prepares him. And by the way, this is the Mark that writes the Gospel of Mark that Peter dictates to him. Bring him to me, for he is useful to me for ministry. Here's the key. If we're going to be a leader, we have to take the initiative. Paul asked for Mark. For the relationship to be healed, both parties had to lay something down. Number 5, you need to accept the fact that there are people who are evil and their goal is to attack you. Verse 14, Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. The Lord will repay him according to his deeds. Paul and Nehemiah named the opposition. Paul named them, Nehemiah named them, these people who were threatened by their success or felt like they could do a better job or whatever it was, envious of their gifts. Daniel Simmons did a great message, 2 messages, on the 23rd Psalm this week. And he talked about God being the good shepherd, and he talked about God being a good host. And he talked about, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Now, this is free. It's not in your notes, but you need to know it. Okay? And I realize I'm taking this out of the context of a whole message that sets up God as the good shepherd. But these are the three things that Daniel brought to the table. When God is your host and he provides a table before you in the presence of your enemies, three things that you need to remember. Number one, my enemies have no impact on God's capacity to meet my needs. Well, my enemies are out to destroy. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Who protected David while he was in the wilderness running from Saul? God did. God did. You see, my enemies have no impact on God's capacity to meet my needs. Secondly, Daniel said, my enemies have no impact on me. I can eat in front of them. I can eat in front of them. And thirdly, God will bless you and your enemies will have to see it. God will bless you and your enemies will have to see it. I was reminded of that a few years ago when things started hitting. I think it was after Facing the Giants came out, and a phone call came in one day from the pastor who fired me in 1975 for quoting Martin Luther King. And now he's so proud of me. Yeah, right. You know what? I have watched God prove that in my life. With people that put me down, ran me down, tried to hurt me, whatever. I've watched God bless me and the enemies have to see it. I want to tell you something. God will not owe you anything when you get to heaven. He'll settle the books. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to run around proving you're right. God is your defender, and he is your shield. And David said, my enemies see me eating because I've got a good host, the Lord. Number 6, you must be willing to pay the price if you want to be the leader God intends you to be. 2 Timothy 4:16, at my first offense, no one supported me, but all deserted me. May it not be counted against them. For the Lord stood with me and strengthened me, so that through me the proclamation might be fully accomplished and all that the Gentiles might hear, and I was rescued out of the lion's mouth. There are times, if you're going to be a leader, when nobody's going to understand. They're just not. I mean, welcome to the party. How many of you as a parent have made a decision and your children didn't understand? And all of a sudden you're a terrible parent and they say things about you and then they come back and apologize and, hey, let me tell you what it's called. It's called L-I-F-E, life. My parents were the dumbest people on the planet until I went to college. And then I realized how smart they were. I thought I knew better than them. I could figure out what to do in Nikita Khrushchev and the Cuban Missile Crisis when I was 11 years old. But I would come out of my room and my mother would say, those clothes don't go together. I couldn't match clothes. And I could put on a black shoe and a brown shoe. I was that smart. But I could figure out the Cuban Missile Crisis and what Kennedy needed to do in that moment. I was really brilliant. If you're going to pay a price, there's just going to be times when no one understands, and can I tell you, and no one cares. No one cares. Sometimes opposition comes from people you expect, and sometimes it comes from people you don't expect. Wow, I thought I was going to get through more than this. All right, let's go to Nehemiah 4 real quick. Nehemiah chapter 4. Nehemiah's building. Key word in chapter 4 is build. The major obstacle to building was people. In chapter 4, verses 1 through 6, building in the face of taunting. Verses 7 through 9, building in the face of threats. Verses 10 through 23, building in the face of internal tension. Chapter 4 and verse 1. Now it came about that when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became furious and very angry and mocked the Jews. He spoke in the presence of his brothers and wealthy men of Samaria and said, what are these feeble Jews doing? And are they going to restore it for themselves? Can they offer sacrifices? Can they finish in a day? Can they revive the stones from the dusty rubble, even the burned ones? You would think that a project to rebuild your city would meet with success and applause. It didn't. It met with ridicule. Calvin Miller said, "How do leaders appear? In many ways. But one thing, however, must be said of all of them. They appear as leaders. Leadership declares itself. Leadership never translates as anything less than leadership." You see, status quo is not acceptable. If you're going to lead, you're going to have to change status quo, because status quo doesn't work. It took a Martin Luther King to lead a civil rights movement. It took a Lincoln to stop slavery. It took a man of tenacity to say, I'm willing to pay the price to keep this country together. It takes a man to stand at the Berlin Wall, Ronald Reagan, and say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Somebody has to stand up and put their big boy pants on and their big girl pants on and say, it's not going to be this way. And that's what Nehemiah did, and all he got was flack for it from the leaders in the community, from the people that had led up to that point. And he made changes, and it all changed. Mark Miller was with us a few months ago, who's, I think, one of the best leaders in America. He's an executive with Chick-fil-A. You ought to read the books that Mark Miller writes. They're short, they're brief, but they are profound. And here's where Mark Miller says we have to change. If we're going to be leaders, here's where we have to change. Number one, with self. The speed of leadership has changed. Jim Collins, in his book Great by Choice, says greatness is rarely the result of random chance, but conscious decision and disciplined execution. Speed. The speed of leadership has changed. We have to make decisions quicker than we've ever had to make them. Number two, systems. Things have to change. Hope is not a strategy. Hope is not a strategy. I hope things are going to get better. Things have to change. Leaders are pruners. And Mark talked about that we are pruners. We prune the harvest, the good things, because good is the enemy of the best. We prune the things that are dying and never recover, and we prune that which is already dead. Now, he made a statement that you ought to write down. If you prune, people are going to resist you. If you don't prune, people are not going to respect you. Leadership is a hard call, and you have to change systems. Number three, structure. The structure of any organization should enable, not inhibit, what that organization is about. Helen Keller said, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. Verse 2, the critics came. They ran with critics. Can they finish in a day? There's sarcasm. They make sarcastic remarks. I love this quote by Chuck Swindoll about Nehemiah chapter 4. Critics constantly look at situations from a human point of view. They don't stop to think that they may be criticizing God's project. If you read in Nehemiah chapter 4 and verse 8, all of them conspired together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause a disturbance in it. But Nehemiah knew what was going on. You see a long quote there by Colin Powell. Let me read you this one. The day soldiers stop bringing up their problems is the day you have stopped leading them. They have either lost confidence that you can help them or concluded that you do not care. Either case is a failure of leadership. Now leave that quote up for just a minute. Who did the people go to when they heard the complaints of Sanballat and Tobiah? They went to Nehemiah. They went to the leader. Why? They knew he was the one that could fix it. You know, it doesn't do any good to talk about the people that are complaining and sarcastic and undermining to people that can't fix the issue. You have to talk to the people that can fix the issue. This was not a case of delegating up. This was a case of Nehemiah was called to be the point person in all of this, in the whole project. So if we're not strong, we will cave in moments when people criticize us. All of us like to be liked. I mean, all of us at heart are like a puppy. We like you to scratch us right behind that ear. And we want you to scratch us on the back until our leg starts kicking. And if you do that, you like us and we like you. But I tell you something, that puppy's still going to make a mistake in the house. Leaders aren't perfect. We got to get out of our head that leaders are perfect. God uses marred vessels. Everybody in the Bible is a marred vessel. Enoch walked with God and he was no more. That's about the only one you got outside of Jesus. Peter, I mean, would you have picked Peter to be the preacher of the first sermon? I wouldn't have. I'd have said, okay, boys, we're going to take a vote. Who's going to preach the first sermon? I vote for John. He was the only one that stayed there with Jesus all the way through. I might have even voted for Mary Magdalene. She at least went to the grave and had to go tell Peter and John that it was empty. The preacher said a woman preacher. Just seeing if you're awake. I love what one seminary psychiatrist said when he was asked to define life. Life is stress. You better like it. Let me give you two common characteristics of the enemy, then we'll pick up on this the next time. Number one, psychological warfare. Chapter 2 and verse 10, chapter 4 and verse 1, they used ridicule. Sanballat made fun of Nehemiah and the workers. He ridiculed the Jews. He mocked them for seeking the welfare of the sons of Israel. They will play mind games on you. If you're a leader, there are predictable defensive responses. These people began to question Nehemiah's motives, but they underestimated his resolve. And so Sanballat surrounded himself with yes men. When you see Tobiah, if you read the book of Nehemiah, Tobiah is just a yes man. Whatever Sanballat says, that's what I'm going to do. Dale Galloway said, to me, this is a great quote. Some of you have been in these kind of churches. Thank God we're not one of them, but some of you have been in these kind of churches. This is a great quote. I should have put it in your notes. To me, one of the wonders of the world is how negative people in a church find each other and create a negative force. By some miracle, their negativity draws them together. The greater you're trying to do things for God to reach people, the more kinds of resistance you're going to experience. So look in your notes, and we're going to stop right here. When Jesus came to earth, born as a baby, grew up, began his ministry at 30, there were 5 groups that he had to contend with. By the way, these 5 groups are still alive. The Pharisees, let's go back. Well, how far do you want to go back? I want to go back like it used to be when I was growing up. Well, we don't. Because when you were growing up, churches didn't have air conditioning and heating. And we kind of like it. We're spoiled. We're the spoiled children of God. And, I don't want to sit in church and see fans and nobody knows which way to fan and they're all hitting each other. I mean, the Pharisees always wanted to go back. Let's go back. The Sadducees, let's go ahead. But you see, the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, the inspiration of Scripture besides the Pentateuch. They were the liberals of the day. So there's a whole group of people out there that will resist you if you're a leader and say, well, the truth doesn't matter anymore. Everything is relative. What's true for you may not be true for me. We don't want to go ahead that way. Number 3, the Herodians. Let's go with. Let's just cooperate. Let's not be a nuisance. Let's not make any waves. Let's not cause any trouble. By the way, that's exactly what the church in Germany did during World War II when 11 million people were killed. Let's just try to get along. And you can never get along with the enemy because they will never tell you their real motives. The Zealots, let's go against, let's kill all the Romans, let's stop all the politicians. The Essenes, let's go out, let's just get out of here. And so you can go out into the wilderness, out by the Dead Sea, and you can see where the Essenes escaped and where they had all their rituals and everything else, but they just got away. They just left. They withdrew. You don't become holier by crawling into a hole. We are in this world, but we're not of it. And if we're going to be leaders, we have to be leaders in the world. We can't go back. Here's where we are. This is 2015. This is when we're alive. We can't go back. I mean, I wish for goodness sake that Barney Fife and Andy were in charge. Because at least I know Barney's only got one bullet and he's never going to hit anybody with it. But those days are gone. The Dick Van Dyke Show days are gone. The Leave It to Beaver days are gone. The Cosby Show days are gone. It's a different world. And we can complain about it, but we can't go back. We've got to decide, what does it mean to lead in the world in which we live? And how do we make the world in which we live a better place? We can't go ahead of God and add to the Word of God. We can't go with and compromise and be conciliatory, and then all of a sudden we wake up like the pastor that's all over Facebook right now telling us that churches just need to get over some of the things that we stand for and stand against, and we just all need to just cave in. Not on my watch. The Bible's still true. The Bible's still the final authority. And I don't care if the Supreme Court of the United States votes every day to make something that is ungodly legal. It's still ungodly and it's still illegal. That's just the way it is. And it really doesn't matter. You know, you see, there's the Fox opinion poll, the MSNBC opinion. Who cares what the opinion poll says? What I want to know is, what does God say? What does God say? How does God tell us we're supposed to stand? And I want to tell you something, folks. In this world in which we live, every one of us better decide we're going to be leaders. Every one of us, every young person, every child, every family, every man, every woman in this room, we better decide we're going to be leaders, because if we're not, we are going to get run over. We may get run over anyway. But let us be like the young man in China who stood in Tiananmen Square in front of a tank and say, not on my watch, I'm taking my stand where God's told me to take it. God bless you. Have a great week.